Can you recall a moment in your life when you just said, something's got to give? Do you recall a moment, and maybe it was even really recent, where you felt like you were painted into a corner, when you felt like you were stuck, out of options, out of resources, just ready to throw the proverbial towel in. And you might have said something like, something's got to give. And when we're in that frame of mind, you know how disconnected we are from possibility. Pretty much completely, except for that we are breathing and we have the capacity to cry out. Right? And in that moment, in that kind of moment, we're thinking something out there has to change. And we're thinking maybe someone out there will come get me out of this corner. But something's got to give. The interesting thing is that when we look at that phrase, we actually discover our answer. And we discover it by being willing to interpret it a little differently. It's actually someone's got to give. And I bet you know that the punchline is that someone is us. Why is that? Why is that? Well, it just so happens that the act of giving is the thing that primes the pump. That the act of serving, if you want to choose a more comfortable term, that the act of serving is what brings good to us, because it starts the flow again. It starts the flow again. Not only that, but in breaking this cycle of feeling as if we're up to here, right? Up to my eyeballs and alligators. I know Rick went kayaking and saw two the other day, but he wasn't up to his eyeballs. They were just over there. Now, I've been canoeing in the Everglades during a drought, and you could walk on their backs. There were so many. When we feel overwhelmed, when we feel stuck, when we feel like for all intents and purposes we have nothing to work with, we get in that place and we feel like there's nothing that we can even address it with. That's when the concept of giving is the utmost of challenges, because we're in a place of thinking we have nothing to give. So when we say something's got to give, we think it's got to come from outside of me because I don't have it. So the opportunity, this is something that Eric Butterworth calls an opportunity. When we get to this moment and we say something's got to give. And some of my beautiful friends here have been talking about Eric Butterworth. Maybe go pull that book off the shelf with Spiritual Economics and have a look again. And so it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity because of that. So here we have this experience of being painted into a corner, and we're like, I have no more of this. Maybe it's I don't appear to have any more time. I don't appear to have enough money. I don't appear to have enough help. I don't appear to have enough whatever it is that we're needing in that moment. And the most counterintuitive thing is to imagine giving a little bit of it. And yet, that is what primes the pump. It is what starts the siphon. It is what reintroduces the flow. It is what gets flow going in our lives. And why is it? I know I said that question already, and I suggested that I might answer that. The interesting thing is that when we focus upon something, even for the purpose of giving it, guess what happens? Our attention goes away from not enough. If you have 2 crackers, and you're going to give one of those crackers to your friend who's hungry too, you switch your focus from, I don't have enough crackers, to, I have 2, and I can give one to my friend. And in this moment, that's wonderful. When we imagine, well, gosh, I can't think of what I have to offer. I can't think of what I have to give. I'm feeling all maxed out and taxed out and stuck in this corner. And yet when we imagine, what could I give? What could I do? We shift our attention. And we find all of these things that we actually do have. We find all of these things that we actually could share. Share is a nice word. I remember learning about sharing as a kid. Anybody else have that as a sort of a kindergarten or preschool, first grade kind of lesson about sharing? Sharing is all right. So the idea is that even though we appear to have nothing to work with, if we're willing to imagine what we might give, we open up just a little bit. We open up just a little bit, and we discover that we do have something to share. I keep thinking about food. If you have 2 cookies, you can give away 1. If you have a loaf of bread, biblically, you can, break bread with someone and give them half. Sharing is the first easy-to-handle response to this idea that giving in some way is going to reintroduce flow in my life. So sharing is it's like grade 1. It's like an introduction to this concept of the joy of giving. It's not too threatening. You'll say, well, this is what I got, and it doesn't feel like much. And I can invite my neighbor over, and we can share it. And what happens when we do that? I already said that one thing that happens is that we divert our attention from not enough. And in this gesture of sharing, we recognize that we do have something to share. And then there's what happens when we do it. We open up. And whether it's a cracker or a cookie or half a bowl of soup or whatever it is that we share with another person, the sharing opens us up further. Love has somewhere to move. Love has somewhere to flow. And what happens then? It flows through us and to the recipient as well, and we're both blessed. We both experience increase. You notice how in the circulatory system in our bodies that we have all of these veins and arteries and corpuscles and all this busyness, this network of pumping blood throughout our body to every organ and tissue and system, bringing oxygen and nutrients and hydration to every part so beautifully. And you know what else? Is that all along the way that's also being delivered. You could say that in the journey from my heart to the tips of my toes, all of these other parts of me are nourished along the way. The nature of life and of love and of good is that it not only nourishes the seeming recipient, but the giver in the process of that delivery. And so we go back. Here we are, we're painted in this corner, and we get this idea that, okay, it doesn't look like I have anything to give. And yet I must. I'm going to test this principle. And I'm going to look around me and say, well, gosh, how about if you were unemployed or underemployed? Got time. You could give time. Maybe finances aren't a problem for you, and however, personal relationships and attention and meaningful connection are missing. You might go out there and just make it a point to give personal attention, to consciously connect with people. So what we're actually beginning to talk about here is that the first part is that you can look at what you've got and share it. And that's not too difficult. It turns your attention away from not enough towards, oh, I've got something here. And then in the giving, love rushes in, which is infinite, and expands the whole experience for both us and the recipient. If we step up a further notch, if we kick it up a notch, as Emerald used to say, and maybe he still does, I'm not watching these days. If we kick it up a notch, what we do is we move from faith in Spirit, God, Creator, the principle, to fulfill us in this way. We move from faith in that to the faith of it. This is the realm of giving what we can't see yet. This is where the ante is upped. In addition to sharing. This is a bold move to give before you know you have it to give. This is a bold move to volunteer when you're the busiest person in your neighborhood. Do you ever hear that phrase, if you want to get something done, ask a busy person? I remember hearing that as a child in the church that I grew up in. There was a woman, she was that person. And she was that person, she was probably the volunteer coordinator or something. But the idea was, if you want to get something done, ask a busy person. Because somehow, even unconsciously, they're using that principle. If you want time, here's what it means to give what you don't believe you have. You're a busy person, and you really, really, really need some more time. Give time. It's counterintuitive. It's totally illogical. And it is the activity of a spiritual principle. To give what you don't feel you have enough of. If you want attention, I just mentioned that earlier, make a point to connect with and attend to and really be present with others. And you will find that increasing in your own experience. If you want money, yes, give money. There are many people in this community over the past 2 years who have been participating in these bold experiments to give. To give money that previously was allotted for some other purpose. And we stay together and we say, what are your stories of triumph? What are your stories of increase? What are your stories of miraculous wonderment that result from this bold activity? And the stories are always really, really wonderful. They're always of increase. They're always of good. They're always of more love. Always of more blessings. Always of new opportunities. Butterworth also says that this concept of tithing, by the way, very interesting chapter in that book on tithing. One of the things he says is that the practice is like training wheels. It can be 10% or 5% or 2% or 9% or 15% or 20%. I always give 20% to everybody who waits on me out in the public sector because I used to wait tables. 20% was a gift of gratitude for services rendered, and beautifully. And I thought, oh, this is kind of strange, I walk around giving 20% here and only 10% there. What's up with that? Well, Butterworth suggests that tithing is just like training wheels. It's not the principle of giving and receiving itself. It's that thing that helps us to get in the groove of giving, to become a person who gives, and gives us the chance through a commitment and an experiment to see what happens when we do it. And most everybody who's been in any one of our classes where we've introduced that concept doesn't say, well, now that this is over, I think I'll stop. Because something amazing has begun to happen. So off go the training wheels. There's a story in here about William Colgate. Before leaving his home in Baltimore to seek his fortune in New York, he was advised by a family friend on an old riverboat captain, son, whatever you do it well. And I'm going to translate for you here. It says, take the Lord into partnership. Give him 1/10 of all you make, and you will never fail. Now, you can also use the term law. You can use the term law if that's more comfortable for you. Or whatever that is, but that spiritual principle. Soon Colgate was the manager of a Manhattan soap firm, and a few years later he had his own business. He always set aside 10 cents of each dollar for charity. On his books, his donations were labeled "Account with the Lord." As his profits soared, he instructed the bookkeeper to increase the amount to 20%, and later to 30%. Ultimately, he was giving 50%, and yet the more he gave, the more his business flourished. Among many philanthropic gestures that his tithes gave life to were the American Bible Society, of which he was one of the first directors, Colgate University, which now bears his name. It is a classic story of American enterprise based on the prospering influence of tithing. And yet, he says again, these are training wheels. You can start with any amount. The experiment is to choose a period of time and a certain amount, and percentages work really well. And just stick to it and see what happens. I looked on the internet, which is always so much fun, and found a gentleman by the name of Sasha Dieter. Anybody hear of him? Yeah, Janet's nodding. He puts together investors who would like to have a good, healthy return on their investments with needs in the world that could use some solving. And let's say, for example, someone who has created an invention to bring electricity or running water to a place which has neither, for example. And he will create the funding structure that allows this to happen. And these people feel good about their investment and get a return, a win-win. Normally, there are just charities over here and successful investors over here, and never the twain shall meet. And he's inspired to bring them together in the middle to do great things. Love it. So here's what he did. He tells this story in a TED Talk about choosing, of all times, in the month of December, when everybody's letters about year-end giving are coming in the mail, coming via email. You might have people knocking on your door selling cookies or whatever, asking for your donation at the end of the year. And he said, of all times for me to choose to do this, I did it in December. He decided, I'm going to, for 30 days, say yes to everyone who asks me for help. Now, he rode the subway every day to and from work in New York City. And like I said, it was December. So needless to say, the opportunities to give were numerous. He said yes to every email inquiry, every mailed inquiry, and every request for a handout that happened on the streets and the subway station. And he said the funniest thing happened, of course. He began to feel more generous. He began to recognize himself as a generous person. His life began to shift. His relationship with his family and his children changed. The impact and the success of his work changed. And of course, the lives of everyone he touched with his yeses for 30 days shifted as well. I don't know if you remember that film with Jim Carrey in it called The Yes Man. You remember that? He was getting a divorce. He was a lawyer or something. I don't remember what it was, but he had to say yes. He always had to say yes, and it was just absolute mayhem. And it changed him. It was a beautiful story. So you may decide that whether it's 100 days of it, now they just call them RACs, but random acts of kindness, or 30 days of giving, or maybe you're in a class, or you're just going to give yourself a period of 10 weeks. The opportunity with something's got to give is to choose to enter into an experiment of giving to prime the pump of the flow of your own good. To prime that pump. There are a couple of examples that come to mind when I think about this next piece. And before I do, I'll just share with you what it is. This is when we try to use this law, this, when you give, you receive thing, specifically for the purpose of getting. And it really is humorous. And yet it's not. When we give with the purpose of receiving, we slip back into this thing that Aggie read from that book this morning. We are, rather than manifesting, we are trying to materialize. Eckhart Tolle says that when our ego is involved, we will know because the language will seep into our dialogue that's about me and mine. My great idea, my project, my marvelous outcome, my excellent results, whatever that is. So if we try to use this law, and many people do, they'll go to a manifesting weekend, or a prosperity seminar or whatever. If you go with the intention to get rich quick, it won't happen, because it is in the purity of the giving. It is in letting go of the need that we make room for good to flow. And now I've forgotten my example. So, I know what it was. It's really not exactly related, and it's still funny. When I was a kid, I loved to bake because I lived out in the country, and there was no 7-Eleven around the corner. So every urge to snack, I had to work at it myself. And one day I wanted to make a red, white, and blue cake because it was the 4th of July. I also didn't like reading the instructions. I preferred to cut corners. I was just interested in the outcome. She's laughing. And so what happened was I got this brownish purple thing. There are 2 reasons why it didn't work. One was red food coloring, blue food coloring, and white cake do not make a red, white, and blue striped thingy, The other one was that it was a 6-egg sponge cake, and I was supposed to separate all the eggs and do this to this, these kind of yolks, and these to the whites, and then fold them together, and I disregarded all of that. I'm like, I'm really small, but I'm like, here's the list, dump all that in, put it in the oven, and it came out this thing, and completely inedible. What that really demonstrates is that if we try to cut corners, if we try to get from A to Z without using the principles which are right here available for us, we will absolutely get a different result. We can't get away with not working with the law. We can't. Then we say, I fought the law and the law won, and I can't eat the cake either. Right? So here are a couple of examples about giving and ending up receiving. Do you know that one of the best ways to get a lot of energy is to expend it? Right? Go for a good run, a bike ride, a brisk walk, get on that elliptical, and wave all of your limbs, That is actually an expenditure of energy which makes room for new energy. We understand that, right? It's the same with most batteries. My battery can't accept another charge unless I get rid of what's in it. And if I don't, it will get stale. It will get stagnant. That energy will eventually disappear, and then I'll have to go buy a new battery. Right? It's the same for us. It's the same for us. So even when we feel painted into a corner, up to our eyes in alligators, we feel like, gosh, I have nothing that I can do to change this situation. We do. We do. Because we can look around us in that corner and we can find something to give without moving a step. Let's say today, probably if you were painted in a corner, you might have your cell phone in your pocket, right? Oh, well, I could call somebody and say, hi, I'm painted into a corner. And we could also say, I've really been realizing I've been so busy. I haven't taken the time to reach out to you. And I really care about you. there's one thing you could give. And what would that start? What would that set in motion? There are so many things that we can actually share that we do have, despite these occasional appearances of having nothing, that start that flow. And from there, we can remember Emerald and kick it up a notch and say, okay, now instead of just having the faith in God, Spirit, Creator, Principle, I'm going to aim for having the faith of that. And that means that I am going to give from what I surely believe I don't have. I'm going to give time when I'm the busiest person I know. I'm going to give money when I think I'm the brokest person on my block. I'm going to give love when I think I don't have any. I'm going to tutor someone when part of me thinks I have no business doing that. Whatever it is, give it. A lot of people say the best way out of a slump is to go be of service. The best way to get well is to help someone else to get well. So the truth is, when we think about it, we really do know this already. We really do know this already. So I invite you to prime that pump and to get that flow moving again. And to get that energy moving again. Because love, they say, is the only thing that multiplies when you divide it. And we will find that at that time when we thought we had nothing, we had it all. And in that realization, we will. Because the gift has already been given. And all we have to do is say yes to it. And it's ours.